Welcome everyone to Scrutiny, Climate and Place Committee. Apologies for a slight delay this morning. I'm Adam Boyd and I'll be your chair for the meeting in the absence of the usual chair. Before we proceed, can I check that everybody can hear okay online and in the room? Thank you.
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. The agenda pack with the papers is available via ModGov to members or directly from the council website from the link which was sent out to council members. When I invite someone to speak, please could you clearly state who you are for the benefit of anybody who's listening to the meeting so that they can identify who is speaking. Can I also warmly welcome any members of the public and the media who are joining us today in the room or online. Please be advised that this meeting is being recorded by the council. And finally, as agendas are now viewed electronically, please can I request that members and officers refer to page numbers of any reports from the published agenda pack to assist everybody present in finding the appropriate information. Thank you. Let's go to agenda item 1, apologies for absence. Can I ask Steve?
Yes, Chair. So far, for apologies from Councillor Martin Dimmery, Councillor Alex Wiltshire and Councillor Marcus Kravis, who is being substituted by Councillor Mike Stanton.
And Chair, I also have apologies from Councillor Power, for whom Councillor Cavill is substitute.
Thank you. Agenda item 2, minutes from the previous meeting. This is to approve the minutes from the previous meeting held on 17th of May 2023 as a correct record. Does anyone have any comments or concerns? Thank you. Can I propose to approve these minutes? Do we have a seconder? Councillor Mansell, thank you. Minutes are approved. Declaration of interest, item 3. Can I invite any members to declare any interests in any of the items? No, thank you very much. Agenda item 4, public question time. One statement's been received by Ms. Eva Wyczałski. Thank you. Thank you. Would you like to unmute yourself? Thank you.
Okay, if you could let me know if I've had a minute and then 2 minutes and then 30 seconds left, please, Chair, because the time goes really quickly. Okay, so my 3 questions you've got in front of you. If the Transport Department look at a video live of Dunstan Park Estate, at this time it looked quite empty of vehicles, because most of the estate will be out at work. So the first question was, Councillor Mike Rigby said that because there's been no reports of fatality or injury, they can't treat the road as a priority. Now, the road coming into Sharpham Road, the main thoroughfare, where I live actually, is covered by section 38, which means highways and transport are responsible for that bit of the road. And it's an important bit, because when new drivers, especially who don't know the layout of the estate, come in here, quite often they're going fast, quite often there's children playing, on the road, on the pavements. So then they've got a blind corner, which everybody calls Chaos Road, and then they go into incredibly narrow road, cars parked either side, with cars coming the other way. Emergency vehicles quite often are delayed from actually getting to patients, which is quite serious, because cars are all parked stupidly. They should stop doing that. But the point about it is, do we really have to wait until a child is killed or maimed? I've got to be plain speaking, because that's what the residents asked me to say. Okay, secondly, regarding, I can't remember the second question, but the third question was time frame. So what time frame would, this committee, councillors, offer us? I remember question 2.
Oh, excuse me, you asked for, you have a minute left.
Thank you, thank you. Right, Simon Grindard, resident, contacted 2 councillors, Glastonbury councillors, and they will see what they can do. We don't know how long that's going to take. So, you know, could the committee, council, whoever it is that's responsible, could they look into this and further it along, please, councillors? And thank you very much for listening.
Thank you for keeping to time. Thank you. Do we have an officer response, please?
David Carter's on the call.
Is David Carter on? Yes, David. Thank you.
Hello there. Yeah. Thanks for your inquiry, Eva. There was an awful lot in that. Obviously, we have a written version of it as well. We'll respond to it. It's going to take quite a number of my staff to respond. So we will get back to you in a written response if that's okay.
Thank you. Can I ask that the division members, I think that's Nick Cottle and Susanna Hart, are consulted, involved in this? The local view. That's to both of you, I think, David and Eva. Thank you.
Yes, of course, Chair. Of course.
Thank you very much. Okay, happy. Thanks for raising the point, and will be addressed. Thank you very much. Thank you. Can we move on to agenda item 5, future transport? Oh, thank you, Mike. Hi.
Bear with me because I'm substituting, so I wasn't at the last meeting. I've been at this committee before, but I'm mystified that there isn't a matters arising from the minutes item on the agenda. I mean, I've got a question I want to ask about discussion at the last meeting, but at this point in a meeting, you would normally have matters arising on the minutes, and it's not there.
A good procedural point, isn't it?
We never have matters arising on screening
Yeah.
agendas, but obviously this is the opportune time to, before we get into the next.
Yes, did you want to raise a point?
Thank you, Chair. And we should have it on the, all agendas should have matters arising on the minutes, otherwise there's no continuity between meetings. So I propose that we ask Constitution and Governance to look at that. Yes, there was a whole presentation and discussion about phosphates, river pollution, and how much of the problem in the Ramsar sites comes from farming and how much comes from human sewage. I just wondered what progress there was and what action in the last 2 months on that.
Thank you. Does anybody in the room be able to respond? Alison. Okay.
Thank you for the question. The concentration of the team has been on putting together the Nutrient Mitigation Fund bid to seeking £10 million worth of funding to support the delivery of developments and the Ramsar site. So that's been our focus and attention at the moment. So we haven't specifically gone back to that issue.
The problem we've got, Chair and Committee, is that nutrient mitigation is being proved by this evidence not to be relevant. You know, we're going down a blind alley, spending money unnecessarily. You know, we really should be addressing the fundamental problem of where these phosphates come from and how to stop them getting into the rivers, which is mostly down to Wessex water, frankly.
Thanks, Mike. We're going to have a water theme at the next meeting, aren't we, in 2 months' time? But I think these issues will come up again.
Sorry, Chair, can I ask you to, sorry, Eva, could you turn your camera off, please? Yeah, I thought it was.
So going back to that point.
Sorry, I was just.
I think we can probably deal with this outside this meeting, and I'll help you along with that. That's okay.
Wessex Water was going to be invited to this meeting. It never happened.
It's happening next time. Due to
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could we please, and I'm willing to have a vote on this amongst this committee that guarantees that we are spending the whole of the next committee meeting dealing with this subject. Because one of the problems you have is that Wessex Water's SimGas computer program, which are the figures you're using, has now been completely invalidated. And we can prove that, and we need to get in a senior professor from Bristol University and another one from Lancaster University, and we need to relook at the complete mitigation scheme based on agriculture.
Just to say that we are at the moment trialling a programme through Salinity Solutions, which is extracting phosphates at source at one of the wastewater treatment works. If that is successful, as the initial indications show, that will strip a considerable amount of phosphates out at source. And that is what we're seeking further funding for through the Nutrient Mitigation Fund. So that trial is happening as we speak, this week and next week, and so we should have the results of that. But the initial results that came yesterday evening showing that they're taking out 96% of the phosphates at source.
That's encouraging, isn't it? Henry, we can't guarantee the whole meeting is dealt with by one issue, because then we won't be able to deal with any other business. So there is the intention, strong intention, to deal with this. We'll have Wessex Water, maybe Natural England Environment Agency and others at the water themed meeting, but there will be other issues as well. It may be a longer meeting.
But in October, so that we're dealing with in October, specific meeting, major pollution in this county.
Is that something you can update us on, the in-between meetings, Jamie?
I'm not in a position to at the moment.
Not at the moment, but hopefully next time we will be able to. Who's in order to have Bente? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to say the lady on the screen is not interested in any of the water. She's interested in when highways are going to come back to her with an answer to the question. That was the last thing her lips said before she turned her camera off.
Yes, I understand. What I can do is, after the meeting, I can liaise with the ward division members and Mr. David Carter and provide an answer to that question, I think, rather than deal with it now, because I don't know what the answer is. But thank you. That's a good question. And Councillor Martin, Matt.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Hobhouse raises a valid point. My patch out on the levels bears the brunt of a great deal of this, the restrictions placed by the Ramsar, the phosphates issue, and I wonder whether he isn't correct in asking for or pushing for extraordinary meetings to look at this topic. I mean, meeting every other month is a very good thing to do for climate and place, but this has been rumbling on for so long now that I wonder whether we shouldn't grab the bull by the horns and start looking at extraordinary meetings to look into detail and at a greater frequency to try and sort this out. We can't do it at 6 meetings a year. It needs more contact time.
Thanks, Matt. We have discussed this in an informal meeting about the need for more frequent informal meetings in between the formal every 2 months meeting, and that was kind of agreed between scrutiny chairs and vice chairs, and the answer was that officers Jamie and others will go back and make that happen, and we're waiting for that to be resolved. So we've got, sorry Henry, we've got Dave Mansell first, and then you. Thank you.
Thank you. I would support the suggestion that Mike and Henry have made, that we and others, that we have a special meeting to look at phosphates. There was clearly concerns when it was discussed last time, and there do seem some specific matters that need to be addressed. Now, if we do have a special meeting, it would be important that we're prepared for it, so we have the right people in the room to advise us and bring information to us. So I hope that happens, but it feels like it should be a special meeting. We only meet every 2 months to debate one of our meetings to this whole subject and knock all the other business out. It doesn't feel like the right thing. This feels worthy of a special meeting. And just referring to the idea, the question raised earlier about matters arising, one thing that within Somerset Council's scrutiny meetings have done before, and it was raised last time, was have an early, I think the equivalent, have an early section on the agenda to look at questions and recommendations raised at the scrutiny meeting and say how they've been addressed. And that, I think, is how we can have some continuity going on, and I would suggest is also really important to how scrutiny works. Thank you.
Thanks for your suggestions. We'll certainly consider that. Henry. Henry.
And I'm making a proposal that next meeting is completely taken up with the phosphate sewage issue. I have a seconder. I would like to have a vote from this committee meeting to actually define what is going to happen.
Just need to consult officers and see. Right, so thank you, Henry. The idea is that the plan currently is to deal with water as a theme, phosphates, but not just phosphates. It was sewage pollution as well. Can I finish? And I'm explaining the response. The proposal at the moment is a water-themed meeting in September as the formal meeting. If there are matters arising from that which needs to be an extra formal meeting in October to deal with phosphates, we can do that. But we can't. I wouldn't support the September meeting being completely dedicated to one phosphates issue at the exclusion of other issues which we may want to discuss and may need to go through for formal scrutiny of executive matters as well. So it's September.
Have a seconder, just there. Please have a vote. That's what the committee wants to do.
What's your proposal? Can you repeat that again, please?
My proposal is next meeting in September, dealing solely with the sewage and the phosphate issue on the levels, and that the next meeting deals with any of the normal things that we would normally deal with in September. And I have a seconder over there for that proposal.
So is that just on the levels, not the whole county?
It's the whole county. We have a problem everywhere. The moment the restrictions are on building over almost all the county because of the problems with what Natural England have done to us on the levels. But the problem is that the information that has come to this committee has been flawed, and it's been flawed in depth. We've asked for Andrew Clegg to be asked to this committee now for 2 months, and it's not happened. He put a letter in last time. I have got a formal proposal, Mr. Chairman. I have a seconder. I would like a vote. And I'm not willing to accept anything else.
Did you clarify what your proposal is?
I've already given it to you. I want the September meeting to be dealing with solely sewage and phosphate issues in the county.
Okay, it's possible to take a vote?
But I would just like, my advice as scrutiny manager, for want of a better phrase, is that I don't think we can give you that assurance as a committee that there will not be something else that needs to come on to that agenda at that time. We can absolutely say that the majority of the meeting will be looking at that issue if members are happy with that, but I cannot give you that guarantee, particularly as you have all highlighted the point that we are only having meetings every other month. I cannot give you that guarantee that there won't be something else that needs to come onto that agenda.
Mr. Chairman, I'm willing to say we need a special meeting dealing with just this subject, which has nothing else on that thing, and it can be in October when we're not scheduled a meeting, if that is what I'm being told by the scrutiny officer.
Okay, that would be a month's delay in that case, potentially. Do you want to take a vote on that?
Yes, please.
Take a vote on that?
I have a seconder in Steve
There's
Ashton.
a couple of questions, I think. Is that a question, Matt?
It's a question, yes, Chair. Councillor Hophouse, before we vote on having all of the items moved to the extraordinary meeting, which I absolutely agree with, are we saying then that the current schedule for the September meeting would include no water items? Because I would propose that the extant items for September would be retained and then extended in the extraordinary meeting. Is that, Councillor Hobhouse, is that what you were after? Okay. Then that's what I would propose, so we don't lose time just by shifting it sideways.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Bente.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to say it's got a huge impact on planning as well, because there's so many planning applications, even in the Mendip area in Shepton Mallet, that can't go through, and people are sitting there having to reinvest their money in a new application and try and document something that is completely not possible to document. So it's very, very important that we get the here sorted very quickly.
Thank you. Thank you. Was it Steve? Did you want to talk?
Yes, Chairman, I would just like to support the conditional extension to the process. So rather than an exclusive one, but to actually have it run over to an additional meeting afterwards, yes.
Thank you. We have a question online. Councillor Michael Dunk says, can we have a clarification of the role of the Strategic Planning Committee with regard to the phosphates issue? I believe it's one of their work streams. That's true. Alison, could you give an answer?
Yes, that is true. The Constitution actually sets out that the Strategic Planning Committee will have oversight of the programme that we're currently rolling out to bring forward development in the district. And there is a report going to the Strategic Planning Committee on Friday this week with an update of the position we're in terms of all the different schemes that are rolling out in the different catchment areas, and also some more detail about what we've put into the Nutrient Mitigation Fund bid.
Great. So people can tune into that and come along to that meeting on Friday.
Absolutely.
What time is that, please?
10 o'clock. 10
o'clock. So that's something. So the proposal as amended, Henry?
Mr. Chairman, I am actually substituting on that committee on Friday. I do know what's on the agenda. I still say that we are not looking at the basic science of the problem that we have in Somerset.
Thanks. I don't really want to get into the substance of the issue here. The process now is that we want to vote, do we, on
I would like to go ahead with the
dedicate
vote
time in September
and see
potentially
what
October.
the committee feel, if that's all right, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
We have an amended proposal. We have a seconder to that amended proposal. So we now move to the vote.
Yeah. All those in favour? Thank you. Motion carried. Thank you. Right. Agenda item 5, future transport. And I invite Mike O'Dowd-Jones to give a presentation on this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Mike O'Dowd-Jones, Strategic Manager for Highways and Transport, and I am co-presenting this with Alison Blom-Cooper, who's the Assistant Director for Strategic Place and Planning. So the presentation I'm going to give you is it's the same as the presentation that went out with the papers in terms of the wording, but we have tidied it up a bit to make it a little bit more accessible. So just be assured the words are the same, but some of the formatting might look a little bit different just because we're trying to make it easier to read. So I'll just run through the, hopefully this is coming up now on Teams as well. Good. Yeah, so if I just run through the presentation, there's quite a lot in here. So I will, the substantive part of this is around a set of guiding principles, which the Executive Board considered on the 10th of July and took a decision to endorse, subject to some further consultation and engagement in order to agree those principles in detail as policy evolves. So I've got some slides on those guiding principles. I don't propose to talk through them one by one at the meeting because members have had them. We've had an all members briefing on them as well, and also they were considered by executive. So they're mainly in the slides for us to talk about, I think, when we get to the questions. So hopefully you will have read those, and if you've got questions about those, we will dig into those. I wanted probably to spend the most of time in the presentation on the latter part, which is around our initial work on the carbon analysis that will start to underpin our new transport plans going forward, because I think that would be of great interest to the committee, and I hope as an outcome from the meeting as well, we can talk about ongoing engagement with the committee and potentially through a task and finish group to start to take those matters forward. So forgive me if I skip fairly rapidly through the guiding principles bit, but we can obviously come back to that in the questions. So the paper that the executive considered really has a key aim to have a vision-led approach to both our planning and our transport planning work, trying to get much better high-quality design leading to better places, reduced carbon emissions, and very much moving away from a predict and provide approach, which has been sort of ingrained in how the planning and transport profession works for many years, certainly my entire career until recently. So moving away from that, which seeks to solely provide highway capacity for private cars, and moving much more towards a vision-led approach for the place. What do we want the place to look like? How do people move around that in a more sustainable way? And we also need to reflect in our policy going forward much more strongly rural needs and challenges and opportunities, given that we are a rural county. A lot of government policy on transport has been very urban focused, so we need to make sure that we are doing the right thing for our rural communities. There is, as I said, the set of guiding principles. There's also a set of placemaking principles specifically within this as an appendix to the executive report. So that's specifically around principles that we'll use in development planning. So when we have planning applications, pre-application discussions, master planning, etc., then we have these very clear set of placemaking principles that should steer how we do things. And that will be subject to further engagement and consultation to become a material consideration in the planning process. We want to make that as strong as possible in terms of a policy position to underpin our planning work. Within all of this, the detailed financial implications are not set out. It's very much a set of guiding principles at this stage. There's a lot, it's the start of a conversation, the start of a journey. We will be developing new transport plans and the new local plan, which will be very detailed statutory processes. Out of that will come financial implications in due course, which will be considered through due process, particularly the adoption of those policies and also the medium-term financial planning process, etc. So we haven't sought at this stage to say what the financial implications will be, but it shouldn't stop us setting a very clear set of guiding principles to work to, so that we're heading off in the right direction. This slide just sets out the local transport plan process at a high level, statutory document that we're required to produce by the Department for Transport. We now have a very out of date what was called the Future Transport Plan at the time, published in 2011. So we do have a need to update that. And it does link in with a number of pieces of work that are already underway, particularly around EV charging strategy, local cycling and walking infrastructure plans, and the bus service improvement plan. So all of those things are already well developed and will slot into this plan. And the initial programme is set out there in terms of the development of the local transport plan. So starting with this initial member and stakeholder engagement, aiming to present a high-level transport vision later this year, and then to develop that into a firmer plan next year. The Department for Transport wants to see a plan by the end of next year. It hasn't yet released guidance on how to do that. We've been waiting for about a year now, probably, for the detailed guidance on this, but the department hasn't yet firmed up on exactly what it wants, but it will be seeking information from us over next year in terms of informing its spending review. We are cracking on with this plan anyway. We know what the guidance is likely to say, so we are developing plans anyway in the absence of that guidance, and then we'll make sure that we meet it when we actually understand in detail what it is they're looking for. So I'm just going to hand over to Alison very briefly just to talk through the local plan process.
Thank you, Mike. And just before I start on that, I think obviously we are required to bring forward a new local plan for the Somerset Council area within 5 years of vesting day, but that's quite a long time. And so what we wanted to do through the work that Mike's just described is bring forward some movement and placemaking principles to help support our discussions with developers as, in particular, the bigger sites come forward. And very much, as you have heard, take a very different approach to the way in which we have engaged with them. And obviously, coming together as a highways and planning authority now, we have a big opportunity to do that. So what we've looked at is what the national guidance says, and the national planning policy framework very much sets out a stall that significant development should be focused on sustainable locations and with local amenities within walking, cycling distance. And that's also reflected in the National Design Guide, which sets out patterns of movement are integral to well-designed places, and that successful development depends on a movement network that makes connections to destinations, places and communities, both within the site and beyond. So the appendix that Mike has referred to sets out a series of principles to help guide the discussions that we have on developments that are coming forward. And we will be undertaking a consultation, a formal consultation on this in order to be able to adopt them as material planning considerations to take them into account. So we're just in discussions with the communications and engagement team about the timetable for that, but it's likely to be from mid-August for about 6 weeks. And through that process, we'll be engaging with a wide range of stakeholders, including parish and town councils, obviously our active travel bodies, and so on. And also talking to the developers. We have regular meetings with the developer forum, which we will be engaging with, and the next meeting is actually next week. So we will be sharing with them these principles and giving them a heads up. So there will be an opportunity to make further comments after today for all of you on the principles before they get adopted. And sitting behind them, we will need to have additional guidance, obviously taking account of what's around already nationally, and also the fact that Active Travel England are now a statutory body that we're required to consult on significant applications, and they will obviously be promoting through that cycling, walking, wheeling as priorities. So that very much chimes with the placemaking principles. In terms of the local plan process there, we've set out the stages that we have to go through. Those will need to be agreed through a local development scheme, which will come to executive, hopefully in the next few months, for agreement on the exact timescale. But just to say that we are working on the preparatory work now in order to start that local plan process.
Okay, thank you. So moving on, as I said, I won't talk through these guiding principles in detail. They are here for us to discuss in a moment. We've hopefully set them out a little bit more clearly so that people can talk through those. And then we have the set of placemaking and movement principles that Alison was just talking about. So there are 12 of those. Moving on to the evidence base, I think that's starting to underpin those principles. I think it's important you understand why we're adopting some of those principles in the first place, and I think this evidence base helps to explain that. And this is the first stage, I guess, in understanding what we need to do going forward in the local transport plan. This is a very new part of the process because we have a much clearer focus on carbon reduction within this plan than we have had in previous plans. So we need to do some work to quantify where transport emissions arise in the county, really get an understanding of what the effects are, what we can influence and what we can't influence. And that will then lead into further work in due course on what are the policy interventions that will actually start to reduce those carbon emissions. So at this stage, it's really just the baseline, what's happening with carbon, and then future conversations can be around what do we do about it. So this just reiterates really the overall approach to local transport plans. This is from the draft version of the government guidance, which hasn't yet been finalised. Very much talking about a vision-led approach, as we talked about, a place-based approach. So really understanding the unique characteristics of the local area, and we're doing some work to try and set out some typologies for different places in the county, how they generally operate uniquely in our area, and the sort of interventions that might work in different places. And there's an opportunity to join up really now, particularly as a unitary authority, as we're starting to do on planning and transport, being much more integrated, but also being more integrated with other activities such as public health. So it becomes a very cohesive plan, hopefully, and to start to embed decarbonisation consideration into the planning process. The national context, this just really sets out how transport emissions are a very large part of the UK's and Somerset's emissions generally, particularly as a rural area with distributed communities. We do have a big transport carbon challenge because people do travel quite long distances. We need to decide a decarbonisation pathway, and that's part of this this slide deck. I've got set out towards the end of the deck a sort of indicative version of what a decarbonisation pathway could be as a decision-making tool. And I've described the basic steps that we need to take in terms of identifying the baseline and then establishing in detail the interventions that we'll need to achieve change. So this is really the early insight from the data. This looks at by origin and destination and road type, where is the carbon arising. So we know that 61% of the emissions are actually coming from trips either starting or ending or being made entirely within Somerset. So, you know, there's a big element of potential control there. 23% of that is generated purely by internal Somerset journeys. That's journeys that start and end in Somerset. Most are on local roads, so 64% are on local roads rather than the motorway or other strategic road network roads outside of our control. This just looks at the former district areas and how emissions from transport are arising across the different former districts. So it's fairly evenly spread between the areas. So it's a challenge that's distributed across the whole county. South area slightly more transport carbon generation than the other areas, but it's not massively different. And this looks at carbon emissions by type of vehicle. So 65% by car, but there is a sizable chunk by heavy goods vehicle and light goods vehicle. So that the freight element is very significant here. But it is predominantly road transport. So that's obviously where we need to look in terms of addressing the problem going forward. And then emissions by trip length. So this is a fascinating slide, really, that only 7% of emissions are from trips less than 5 miles in length. So obviously we talk a lot about active travel as a solution, but it is only part of the solution. So those short trips, which could be attracted onto active travel, do make up a relatively small proportion of the overall emissions in the county. By far the largest is those journeys between 10 and 50 miles, so actually pretty long journeys across the county, which will be more challenging to shift. That sort of tends to lead towards more public transport based solutions to tackle that element of emissions. And then there are some significant emissions, 22%, which are greater than 50 miles even. So those are beyond the boundary of our direct influence and will require a lot of working with partners to achieve change on. And I think when you project forward into the future, there will be the proportion of carbon emissions will come from the longer journeys more proportionately, so that those longer journeys will only increase if we don't do anything to tackle the problem. And so this slide starts to bring this into an indicative carbon reduction pathway for transport. So there's quite a lot in this. So first of all, this is an assumption to 2030, which is obviously our ambition as a council. What do we need to do to become carbon neutral by 2030? So just talking you through this from left to right. There will be growth in transport emissions if we do nothing. So new development is happening. So we've quantified at the moment that could be around 7% of additional emissions. If we continue to do new development in the way we've always done new development. So the first challenge for us, the first challenge for us is to make sure that that 7% doesn't happen and that we actually develop new development in a way that is net zero, if that's possible. So that's the first challenge. New development needs to consume its own smoke. So that's why we're going down this line of moving away from predict and provide, having a much more vision-led approach to explore everything that we can do to make sure that new development does not generate additional carbon from transport. Moving along further to the right, then there's a what we call substitute trips. So there's a potential there if we arrange things so that people don't need to travel in the first place. So by encouraging more home working, co-locating facilities for people, employment and where they live, encouraging people to think more before they actually do travel, then there is an opportunity to fairly significantly reduce carbon emissions through those mechanisms. If people do need to travel, which they inevitably will need to do in a rural area, then we feel that using the best possible active travel and public transport solutions that are currently out there, you could potentially reduce emissions by 3% on active travel and 3% on public transport. And then we feel there's a further additional carbon reduction that could be achieved if you were to push beyond the current boundaries and probably involve some national intervention in terms of trying to reduce demand for travel through possibly financial, fiscal measures, etc. Number of mechanisms to encourage people to travel less. And then on the far right, this just illustrates that even if we do all of that, we do need development in a different way. We seek to reduce the need to travel. We do what we can to promote active travel and public transport. There is still a major chunk of decarbonisation that has to come through from alternative fuels. So both freight and private vehicles. So we have a role as a council in enabling electric vehicle take up, and also working with the freight industry and the public transport industry to try and help them decarbonise their fleets. So there's a really big emphasis here on the need to switch fuels as part of this journey. And then at the end, you'll see there is still a 20% gap. So by 2030, something else will have to be done, i.e. offsetting in some form, or working towards longer term targets to actually achieve net zero over a longer term time frame. So apologies, it's a very technical and detailed slide. I just thought it was worth trying to talk you through that in some detail, because this will be the bulk of what we work on going forwards to try and understand how we actually achieve some of these outcomes. It's indicative at this stage, and it will further develop, but it's informative nonetheless. And then finally, just to illustrate that whilst we're on this decarbonisation journey, which is the journey down the middle, the steps that we need to take to reduce carbon from transport, there are many co-benefits across the whole system from doing this, which are described on the sort of outer reaches of this slide on the top there. So decarbonisation of transport does lead to lots of other great outcomes for society, which is what this slide is designed to demonstrate. So I think moving forward to what we need to do. So we need to obviously discuss this as a board and I imagine as a task and finish group going forward to help then consider the interventions that will help reduce those carbon emissions, and then start to integrate this into a plan going forward. So the next steps I would recommend are considering and setting up a task and finish group, and then there's a broad outline of the immediate next steps around engaging on the local transport plan, publishing a high-level vision, and then consulting with stakeholders with a view to developing the local transport plan by next year, and then the scope of the new local plan and the local development schemes over a longer time period beyond that. So thank you. Apologies, it was a very detailed and technical piece of work, and I hope you stayed with that. But very happy to answer any questions that the committee has.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike. Does anyone have any questions and comments? Can we start to write the list down? I've got one quick one. Could you just clarify the scope of your proposed task and finish group? Is it local transport plan focused or wider?
So I think at the moment the task and finish group was intended to be specifically around the local transport plan. I think there will need to be associated processes that Alison was starting to outline around the local plan. I think it's on that there are slightly different time frames and have slightly different statutory requirements. So at the moment I'm just suggesting for the local transport plan, but there will be a conversation about the local plan, I'm sure, shortly as well.
Can I see what's the procedure for that? Setting one of those, another task and finish group up. Do we say yes, we agree with that, this committee, and then you go away and invite members to that?
It would need to be a conversation.
But effectively, yes.
Yes. Okay. So I think interest for members, not just in this committee and online now. So I'm happy that we'll do that. Yeah. Okay. Let's go from the top. Bente.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I saw in the beginning of your presentation. Thank you. It's about the light has to be fixed to a structure. Now, we had a light in Shepton Mallet fixed to a structure, which was the back of a cafe. A lorry hit it, and for 6 months, we had 2/3 of the car park was without light. So if that is true, I think you should go through what is actually happening around in Somerset with things like that. And a lot of buildings in the center of towns are crumbling old buildings, so they don't need anything to be attached to them. And then I followed with interest where you said about not going to work in a car. For 25 years, I've had to take my car to go to work in Wincanton. I live in Shepton. There is no buses that fits with my boss's need for me to be at work. So are you gonna close down all businesses with this here? The lorries are running on diesel up and down because somebody got rid of all the railway stations and all with the railways. What are you going to do? This here seemed to me an awful lot of time you're spending on something that is not possible until you buy or you start building railways. To me, how many employees have you got working on this process here? Progress. Sorry. Thank you.
Can I pick this up, Chair?
Yes, and David Carter. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, so I think, Councillor Hyde, I think those are all valid questions, but what's set out in front of you, certainly was set out to executive and to scrutiny, is the journey that we need to take to achieve an 80% reduction by 2030 in carbon. And what Mike was saying is that the task and finish group through the local transport plan needs to work out what we are and aren't going to do to get there. So I think that if I can characterise what you're saying as some degree of scepticism, if you're okay with that, I think what we're suggesting to you is that through the work we're going to do, we'll work out what we can and can't do. There's obviously political choices in that for which measures you take and how far you go. But what was highlighted in that slide was the measures that are needed at the moment to achieve an 80% reduction by 2030. I don't think, Mike O'Dowd, that we're saying that's absolutely what we will achieve. We're putting it in front of members to say that's what you would need to do to achieve an 80% reduction. We'll now work with you through the task and finish groups and through the production of the LTP to work out where we get to.
Thank you.
Thanks, David. Yes, correct. So just to expand on what that pathway slide was intended to show, it's an ambitious but potentially achievable pathway if the right resources were to go into achieving those outcomes. So you'll see on public transport, for instance, we've said you could possibly get a 3% change in emissions. So we're not basing the entire plan on people being able to travel by bus for every journey across the county. We're saying we feel there's more that could be done. However, there's an enormous chunk of carbon emissions which will still be related to car travel because that's what people will have to do in this type of rural environment.
Thank you. We've got next questions from Councillor Henry Hobhouse, then I've got Mike Stanton, Dave Mansell, Mick Dunk online and Jill Slocum online. So Henry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I have a number of questions. And the first is a procedural one. I understood that scrutiny came before executive so that a future decision made by scrutiny was not called into executive. Could somebody confirm that I'm right? And if so, why all these papers today are coming after executives made the decision on them?
Thanks, Henry.
It would depend on the type of paper. I mean, in an ideal world, the expectation is that papers will go through scrutiny first, certainly in terms of a decision paper, before going to executive. Sometimes that's not possible, but sometimes, depending if it's a policy or the agreement of a policy, then that will come to scrutiny afterwards.
I'm happy to respond as well. Councillor Hobhouse. I think, yeah, I mean, ideally we would have come to scrutiny first. I think there was a very clear desire from the lead executive members to put in place a set of guiding principles at the earliest opportunity. I think we looked at the timetables and it would have probably been around October potentially by the time we could get something in place had we put scrutiny first. And we feel that we're on a very challenging timeline to actually develop these policies, so we need to get some principles established quickly. It's not ideal, absolutely, and I think there was comfort in the fact that it was a set of guiding principles that was then going to be subject to quite some discussion and consultation and engagement before they became policy and were firmed up, so that there were lots of further opportunities for people to engage before they became fixed in policy terms. So that's where we got to, but I do appreciate it. It's far from ideal, but we did also discuss it with the scrutiny chair, Councillor Dimmery, as well, and he was content with that approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My first question on the actual paper is to do with our waste lorries. Excuse me. I understand that we bought an electric waste lorry. You can nod your head, Mr. Dowd Jones, if I'm correct, which has major problems because it can't go over bridges because it's too heavy. That being the case, I would like to ask the waste people on this particular subject to look at, and I've already asked once, to look at gas turbine lorries where you can burn excuse me, the methane from the food waste in the lorry, and the lorry engine doesn't run when it's stationary because the electric pack on that lorry is running the tipping and the hydraulics and stuff, which means that you're removing most of the diesel fumes from the towns because the lorries are only running when they're moving between places. Does that make sense?
So, thank you. I think the policy position on this, which is set out in the guiding principles, is that the council would like to see all of its fleet up to 3.1 tonnes gross vehicle weight to be electric. There will be other vehicles that are larger that can be electric, and certainly in our highways discussions at the moment on the new highways contract, we are hearing of the fact the industry is breaking ground on this all the time, and there are vehicles of 4.5 tonnes up to 7 tonnes even, which are electric at the moment. So it's an evolving industry and evolving technology. What we're saying in the paper is there will be alternative fuels for the heavier vehicles, and we would certainly like to explore those. So we're not ruling anything in or out, particularly within the policy. I'm sure there'll be a variety of technologies that will come into play. I think on that specific one, I'm not a waste vehicle expert. Mickey,
Can I bring Kirsty Larkins in here?
Kirsty might be able to pick that up. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm Kirsty Larkins and Director for Climate, Environment and Sustainability, and Waste falls under that. So thank you, Councillor Hobhouse. We have had some issues with the electric vehicle, but it's more around the range that the electric vehicle can travel rather than issues around navigating different road conditions. When we had the vehicle, it was relatively new technology, and that has taken time to bed in, and you'll all be aware that technology is moving quite quickly all the time. I will certainly take your question back to our contractor around gas turbine lorries and see if that's something they're looking into. I know they're very keen to look at alternative fuel types, so I'll come back to you and the committee at a later point on that.
Thank you, Kirsty.
Yeah, Dixie.
Thank you. I'd just like to add to that around kind of waste lorries, that I think it's easy to focus on, you know, converting those bin lorries into more sustainable transport. And yes, indeed, we do need to do that. But if you're looking at carbon emissions and saving carbon emissions, there are other very important things like looking at logistics, reducing the number of journeys, and indeed us all producing less waste to reduce the need to collect them. And of course, in terms of waste and carbon emissions, the big one is methane from food in landfill. And so it's kind of tackling those issues as well as the transport lorry. So I'm just kind of alerting people to the big picture, really. Thank you.
We are already producing methane in large quantities in Bridgewater with our food waste anaerobic digester. And it's the use of that methane that I'm trying to put back into the system so that we have I can't think of the word, but a good recycling of the stuff that we're using, if that makes sense. Right, the next, sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Can I just ask how many you have? There's
the buses.
A long queue of people waiting to speak.
I know that. This is the last one. The buses and the trains. One of the things that we are going to have to go to government about is how do we extend or make cheaper, well, at the moment we're on a cheap bus system, so that we can actually get more people on the buses to go to work. I've just looked up, I live in Castle Carey, and yes, I should have come by train this morning and it would have saved this council a £5. But the difficulty of getting train tickets as opposed to getting in the car, and the same with Edric on his bicycle, because I've checked that Castle Carey to Taunton is a bicycle train. You've done it. We need to have some simple way that we can get our own expenses down as an example to the others. And one of the things I always saying is that carbon saving on its own won't get people to save. If you can save money, people will save carbon. And that's what I'd like to put across to this particular board that you're going to be setting up. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know if there's any need to respond to that. We all know we need to improve bus transport. Mike Stanton.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 3 questions, all of which only require quite short answers, I hope. First of all, excellent work. I think particularly page 39 and the indicative example are very informative, and all the stats that lie behind. My apologies if I'm asking questions for which the answers are in the pack, because I had very short notice of substituting and I've tried to read everything, but I may have missed things. And I'm conscious that the background to all of these questions is that we really do now have a really strong vested interest in electrical power, not just with Hinkley Point, which we had already, but with the battery factory as well. So, you know, electricity is right at the heart now of all our thinking about this. My questions are about slides or page 25, 26, 29, starting with page 25, point D, street and highway design. I couldn't see any mention of the relationship of that to speed. I'm conscious that we're constantly hearing at parish councils, heard last night, you know, people don't obey the 30-mile-an-hour limit, they don't obey the 20-mile-an-hour limit. We need psychological indicators to people that this is a place where you go slowly. Is that built into the process somewhere? Should I go on with all three questions, Chair? Or so that's question one. Question two, slide 26, point G. Apparently we've decided, the executive has decided to increase highway capacity only as a last resort. And I'm conscious of the data that says that after up to 2050, pollution emitting cars will still be dominant. But leaving aside the fact that the major road building is down to national highways, we are still going to be in a position between now and 2050 where we do actually need some more roads and flyovers, thinking about the roundabout at Ilminster onto the 358, for instance. So I'm doubtful whether treating increasing highway capacity as a last resort is actually the wisest thing to do, particularly given the shift away from polluting vehicles and towards non-polluting vehicles. So really, why are we doing that, and what is a last resort? You know, is a 3-mile traffic jam at Ilminster a last resort indicator? And then on page 29, bullet point 3, about material pallets. I don't know if anybody, I'm thinking here about the noise from road surfaces. If you've ever lived close to a motorway, which I have, or driven an electric vehicle, which I also have done for many years, you'll be conscious that most of the noise pollution from cars comes from tyres on the surface. And if you have ever driven on one of the low noise emission surfaces, which there are on various bits of the motorway in the country, not in Somerset, I don't think, you get very low levels of noise. And I think that relates to the amount of emission of particulates from the tyres, because a polluter is particulates coming from the tyres gradually breaking up as they abrade on the road surface. So the question is, do we have a policy for shifting road surface material to low noise material?
Can I pick those up, Chair, if that's okay?
Thank you, David. Thank you. Carry on.
Yeah, so on the first point, Councillor Stanton, what we're trying to achieve is that, to a degree, having enforced speed limits with road humps and lots of signs is probably a sign of failure, that the alignment of the road didn't lend itself to that speed limit. So in the design principles we're putting forward, and working with developers, we're working on the principle that if we get it right, the speeds will be low speed. That is the nature of it. So we won't have this problem which we have on existing developments in existing areas where speeds are higher than the speed limit, and then we're having to put additional measures in. So that's the intention of that. On the road building, you're absolutely right. The A3 is national highways. We will have to see whether national highways continue to develop the schemes that they have, or they are at the moment. That is not a matter for us. That's a matter for them. We are obviously a consultee in the process. It comes back to our own experience in terms of funding major road building, where we as the council are the funder. You'll be aware that Walton and Ashcott bypasses, we didn't succeed in getting those funded, partly because they're becoming ever more expensive for 150, 200 million for those two, for example. So we're really sort of looking at the fact that it's getting increasingly difficult to deliver road capacity for a multitude of reasons: cost, environmental, etc., public perception. Where we will obviously have to build roads is in allowing access to the network. We have to build estate roads and allow them to connect into the network. So it's just a subtle point to say we won't be seeking major road building funding for the foreseeable future outside what National Highways delivers. And on materials, yeah, you're absolutely right. There are lower noise materials. They tend to be much smaller aggregates that are involved in it. They emit less noise. The bit of the technicality behind it is that materials that we used in the 70s and 80s had what was called a positive texture, and the noise effectively bounced off that and created the din it did. Modern materials have a negative texture and they absorb into the material the noise. So we can specify lower noise materials where there's a particular issue through a particular place. They're not that much more expensive than standard materials. So hopefully that answers your questions.
Mike, yes.
just want to come back on one bit of the first answer. That's all very helpful. Thank you. I wasn't thinking of humps and signs particularly for psychologically getting drivers to slow. I mean, I lived in the Netherlands for 5 years, and the way their equivalent to speed humps are designed are long flowing things, which if you drive at the speed limit or just below it, you hardly notice that you've gone over the thing. But if you go at 5 kilometres faster, boy, do you notice. And we don't seem to have those well-designed kind of arrangements in this country. Not more signs, please, fewer signs. Actually, they distract if you look at it from a driving research point of view. Chicanes maybe, but that was the kind of thing I was thinking of.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, David, for your answers. Next, I have Dave Mansell.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I've got a few comments which I'm hoping will be noted, and I think I've got a couple of questions within this, so I'll try to make those clear. Just very quickly, and certainly not looking for a response, but I would add to the comment that a paper like this, I would much rather see it coming to scrutiny first, and was, as I've already said elsewhere, concerned when it went to executive before coming to us. That isn't the right way around, and I just hope we can try and get it the right way around for important things like this in future. But that's fine. Can leave it there. Now for me, I'm very keen on what's being proposed here. This is a good vision. I like what is proposed, and I have to say, I'm really keen on seeing it work. And so, for that reason, it is important that we give it our best shot and try and get it right. And one comment I wish to sort of make in that regard is, I am aware, though, that some people are going to find this challenging, and they will be concerned. And we've seen some of these things proposed elsewhere. We've got experience seeing what happened in other parts of the country, a little bit within Somerset as well, where there can be some significant kickback to part of this. And I think some of that kickback is because what's being proposed is not well explained or well understood. Sometimes it also may be wrong, but I hope we won't do things wrong. We will do things, we will be proposing the right things. But for that reason, I do think we need to be really aware of that. And so the consultation and engagement in this is going to be very, very important. And I think that is a question that I'm keen to know a little bit more about how that will be approached, and how some of people's understandable concerns will be addressed. I think it will be, from what I'm reading here, but I think it does need to be made really, really clear. And connected to that, I think people need to understand how it may apply to them. We don't want them making wrong assumptions and think, for instance, cars are going to be banned everywhere and whatever. It's reducing cars, so because people want to use the alternatives, because the alternatives are better for a number of reasons. But we're not going to completely stop car use. That's not what's being talked about here. So we do need to make that clear. And yes, anything further said on that, I'd be interested. And another challenge, I think, where I'm sure we're going to find is how we fund the changes. You can sort of see how this is possible for new development and how we can do things better with new development. The trouble is, what we've got existing is actually what we're mostly going to have. And how are we going to fund improvements and the changes needed within our existing neighbourhoods? And that does look like a big challenge, and I think needs more thought than I feel it currently looks like is here. I think that will be a big challenge that needs to be addressed and developed much more as the plans move forward. I will, and that's, I think, my second question. So the rest of what I've got now probably is just comments, as I say, I hope will be noted. I will comment on on fuels, but perhaps particularly regarding what the council vehicles may be using, which is K in the guiding principles, and this was raised at executive when it went through. Now, I've read up quite widely on this, and from what I've seen, electricity is absolutely the front runner, and we're just muddying the waters and potentially going down false trails if we start looking too much at alternative fuels, because the science and the technology shows in many cases they're not going to be the right solution. They're not going to be anywhere as good as what electricity can deliver. Now, electricity still needs to deliver more. There is concern over range and the heavier vehicles, and maybe electricity won't be able to deal with all of those. But electricity is really developing rapidly. The alternative fuels aren't, but electricity as a technology is really moving forward quickly in the type of vehicles it can cover. And the science shows that in terms of reducing emissions, in most of the things we want to achieve, it's the one that can deliver. So I would, so for that reason, let's really see what electricity can deliver and not falsely limit ourselves unnecessarily. But it is still very much developing, and there may be some cases where alternative fuels are needed, but I think they will be minimal, because if only for the reason that the supply of alternative fuels will be limited, and they're better used elsewhere, not in a mass way for transport.
Dave, thank you. Can you?
I've nearly wound up. Yep. So, and just in that regard, just so we can understand, it gets a little difficult to understand what's meant by alternative fuels. There's a little lack of imprecision here. A fuel is generally something you burn. I think sometimes we're saying alternative fuel is covering electricity. I don't know. I'm just struggling with some of the terminology we sometimes use here. Wish to mention that. Right, nearly done. Task and finish group, very much support that. So I would like to see the committee approving that. Very interested in being involved. And just finally, then, one point on page 41, which I feel I should draw attention to. I think probably addressing it will come in the next paper and the work that does. But page 41, we've got one sentence here which just looks completely confused. So this is all the one sentence. Carbon neutrality by 2030, incorporated into LTTP vision and objectives, setting Somerset's trajectory to net zero by 2050. So it seemed to be saying both 2030 and 2050 to achieving the same thing. So there's some big inconsistency here. And I think this is the challenge of achieving our carbon targets by 2030. And I'm very open, I do think we need to have a discussion about that. And we need good guidance on what the council's trying to achieve. But leaving this confusion about 2030, 2050, even in the same sentence, is not something we can do. We need to have clear guidance on what we're trying to achieve and when. And as I say, I suspect that perhaps is a discussion that the next will come in the next paper.
Okay,
thank you.
Thank you. I think David.
Shall I pick up most of it, Chair, but leave Mike particularly for the LTP process, Mike, and the consultation and the implementation of Dave's question, if that's okay. So on the wider point, Dave, that you made, I think we all completely agree. It's a complicated process, but actually, as you wisely say, it doesn't require that many people to change their behaviour. So it's certainly not a war on the motorist. It is just having enough people that change their behaviour that will relieve congestion and reduce emissions. So completely agreed. It is a complex subject. I think that's another thing about how do we message it out to people. These are the changes. What does it mean? Henry picked this up as well. What does it mean for people? I think bringing that to life. And again, Mike's team are looking at that in terms of the personas of the people that we're trying to reach. Your point about alternative fuels, I think the other thing to point out is, Dave, on this is that it's not our language, that's the government's language on alternative fuels. When they set out their carbon reduction for transport, I think it was either 2020 or 2021 in the wider policy that they used that terminology. So I don't disagree with you on a technical level. Fuel is one thing, energy is another. They're sometimes used interchangeably and not very usefully. But that's what the government have tasked us with looking at is alternative fuels. They've used that phraseology. With regard to the point about, electricity being the solution, clearly at the moment, that's how the government sees it. It's given us or awarded us 3.7 million in Levi funding to roll out on-street vehicle charging. So it clearly sees that as the front runner. I think from my own experience in dealing with certainly buses and the alternative fuels of buses, hills are a particular problem for PSVs and HGVs for battery power. Wrightbus at the moment are looking at hydrogen fuel cell buses, not internal combustion, but hydrogen fuel cell buses to get over this problem. We will all know we live in a hilly county, so that problem will apply to us. And I think at the moment, as you say, Dave, nobody quite knows whether or not that will be successful. So I think predominantly the electrification of the fleet, particularly for the lower weight vehicles, is something that will progress rapidly. That the diesel and petrol ban in 2030 will make sure of that. The fact that HGVs diesel HGVs haven't been banned until 2040 is probably revealing of the technological challenges that the government sees in achieving that. So if that hopefully answers some of the questions, I'll pass over to Mike for the LTP process and consultation.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, David. So, yeah, I mean, it's a really good point, Councillor Mansell. I think even sitting here trying to describe to you the carbon pathway slide, it's really challenging stuff. It's based in science that we all interpret slightly differently. So I'm very conscious in even trying to explain that one slide to you. It's complicated, difficult to describe. Nonetheless, we want to take an evidence-based and a science-based approach because we want to get it right. So you're going back to your point, we've got some tough decisions to make. We want to make the right decisions based on good evidence. So I feel that's probably behind the scenes stuff. And then what we want to do then is, when we're clear what we actually want. Hello? That's back again. Yeah, so when we're clear what we want to do differently, we then engage with people in a simpler way, and we're talking about these place typologies, so we can describe a place like where you live. This is how it works, and these are the sorts of things we could do differently. We're talking about personas, so this is a person who is like you. We might have 12 different sort of types of people. People can hopefully see something of themselves in these persona types, and then we can say this plan means that for this person in this place, this is what we need to do with them in order to achieve the outcomes that we want, and these are the sorts of changes you can expect. So hopefully we can present it to people in a much more personal and simple way, and keep the evidence base and the science kind of there, but perhaps a bit in the background and in technical papers that people can access if they understand that stuff and want to look into it. But I appreciate it's going to be a challenging thing to do. We haven't worked out in detail the consultation and engagement plan in terms of dates and when and where and who, but it will be along those sorts of lines. So hopefully that explains the thinking. And we've already done some initial work on these sort of persona types and what they might look like. In terms of funding, one of the reasons for preparing this local transport plan is that the government wants to inform Treasury of what Treasury needs to do to achieve these outcomes. So that was the reason really for next year's deadline, so that it can inform next year's spending review. So at some point DFT will be asking us for a form, I think, saying what are your proposals, how much do they cost and what do they achieve in terms of carbon reduction, and then they can build a case for Treasury. I think there will probably be a big shock within DFT next year and within Treasury when they actually start to understand from local authorities across the country, if they want to achieve these outcomes, what's it going to cost. Nonetheless, that's the process. So we hope there will be more money coming through the system. We hope it will be more devolved with more control. So that's certainly what we're aiming for. And then we need to get into the likes of, do we need to start to change how we deal with financial measures that the council has control over, parking charges, etc. Do we charge for things we're not currently charging for in the transport system? How does it all work? So there are ways of dealing with funding and financing. Nonetheless, it will be a challenge, and I presume there will be a fixed pot of money from government. It won't be dissimilar to what we have at the moment. So there will be some tough decisions to make, I'm sure. But this is, as I said, the start of the journey, and we will hopefully understand those things in a bit more detail as we go through. So hopefully that explains those 2 points.
Thank you. I'm mindful of the time. We've got 5 more items to go through, and I've got 6 members who still want to speak. So I will plead with everybody, please try and keep it brief and ask what you really need to know. Comment. I've got Councillor Cahill in the room. Thank you.
Most questions I want to ask have been asked. There's one comment to be made, and that's page 29. You've got undefined strips of land to be designed out, basically. Fine if we're doing the development, but when dealing with developers, shouldn't we be looking at an almost pre-application requirement here? Because otherwise they will draw the red line where they want it, and we'll end up with a problem.
I think what we're trying to do is to make sure that there aren't strips of land which are not properly maintained for the future. So that is something that we will be looking through if they come forward as part of a planning application. Then we will be looking to make sure that it's clearly defined whether it's highway land, private land, and how it's going to be maintained.
I accept that, but I've seen too many applications come in with different lines by developers for development to the land that they bought, leaving those undefined areas that just stick about. That's why I suggested we need to do it as part of their pre-planning advice.
Thank you. Councillor Steve Ashton's next.
Yes, a number of points I asked have been addressed, but thinking about the consequences, it looks like your car parking formula is going to be addressed. It's going to be attacked or reduced by this initiative here. This is something that's used quite commonly to address overdevelopment on large developments, because it's a formula that produces specific results. So you must have these amounts of car parking spaces in large developments. I say if you take away that, you are reducing our ability to fight against inappropriate overdevelopment. So I would like that to be considered as being reinforced in consequence to removing or reducing the car parking formula.
Yeah, I think we can just note that and make sure we work on that issue as we go forward. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Edric Hobbs, the last one in the room.
Thank you very much. Not surprisingly, my comments are based around cycling infrastructure and the 20-minute communities thing. First of all, I'd like to ask about, can we roll out some more of the quiet streets, which obviously are cheap to do? You just put a couple of planters in the way and it cuts up the rat runs. That would increase people's ability to move around their local area without fear of having speeding traffic through them. Also, I've used quite a lot of cycling infrastructure lately. I live in Shepton Mallet, cycle from Cheddar to Weston-super-Mare to work. It's great to use some of the infrastructures there already through the Strawberry Line and all the work that's been done by Locking Partners, etc. So I think we need to make sure we build the infrastructure. People use it. I've seen so many kids use those cycle paths. If you build it, they will come. Also, I'll just quickly, one last thing I'd like to make. I know we have the right to use compulsory purchase orders to do things like link up parts to the cycle path network, such as we're building the Strawberry Line where people have given us permission to do it, but have we got, putting it bluntly, the balls to go ahead and use the CPOs where necessary to build things quickly, rather than hopefully people give in eventually over a decade? So are we brave enough to use our CPOs to get infrastructure built to enable 20-minute cities and communities to exist? And sorry, there's one more last thing. I've been passionate about trying to get bicycles onto buses, not folders, full-size bikes. They do it in other parts of the country, but first seem to be one of the people reluctant to do it. I represent a very rural community, but people can get off the Bristol bus. It's only 3 miles into Priddy or a couple of miles from Shooton Mendon to Ston Easton. So I would really like to push that and work with First as our major bus provider, so kids can get off the bus. You can cycle to Wells from Priddy in 20 minutes. You won't come back initially when you've been doing it for years. Thank you.
I can pick up the point about compulsory purchase orders. Yes, we should have those, but they should really be a last resort, because the problem with compulsory purchase orders is it's a long process and it doesn't necessarily speed things up. So negotiation is generally better if you can achieve it that way, but yes, absolutely, as a last resort.
I think on the other points, yes, as you can see in the proposals, active travel, both in terms of trying to replicate more strawberry line type approach and widening that out across the county is certainly a big ambition as part of these principles, and also urban active travel and trying to make better use of streets. So I think all of those things are very well aligned with what we're trying to achieve here. In terms of cycles on buses, we have come back to this over the years. We've now got a new enhanced bus partnership in place with the bus operators, so we can certainly ask the question through that partnership about what the opportunities are and whether there are any particular barriers that would be to getting more bikes on buses. But very happy to ask the question through that partnership.
Thank you. Thank you. We've got two online now. Councillor Dunk, then Councillor Slocum. So Mick Dunk, please. Thanks for your patience.
Thank you, Chair. No, I'm feeling under time pressure really, but I think some of the questions I was going to ask have been covered in Dave Mansell's comments already. I was going to say about alternative fuels in on page 26 under K and L. L is we work with operators to agree the most appropriate alternative fuels. Well, do we have a stance on biofuels, because they will potentially want to use biodiesel, but I think we've had problems with that with the Somerset Waste Partnership, where we have a supplier, or we did have a supplier of recycled biofuel, which is probably the most sustainable form of biofuel, and I don't think we should be planting fields in Somerset just to produce the fuels for transport through the county. So that's something I wondered if we had a stance on. And the other thing was, will we be able to get on board at the beginning of the Jaguar Land Rover battery factory in order to make this, I don't know what stage the transport plan will be yet, but we really want to get on board early to make sure that the right connections are made. And if there is any, we call it Section 106 money, but any way that we can get networks so that the entire workforce isn't just driving to this factory. And that's my concern. And this should be an exemplar, or if you like, or a model of how to do it. And lastly, I have a question about the figures in your page 39, switching fuels. There is a slight problem where at the moment, if you have an electric car and you plug in, and this is probably, I'd like an officer to clarify this, if I plug an electric car in, I don't actually get renewable energy at the moment. I do at my own home sometimes because I'm paying for it via Ecotricity or whatever. So I just wanted to know that if the figures are based on an assumption that an electric car is 100% carbon neutral, ignoring, of course, the manufacture costs. So that was my sort of final point, really. How do we incorporate grid electric?
So to pick up the last point first, Councillor Dunn, it's our understanding in the work that WSP did for us that the trajectory of decarbonisation of electricity is assumed in the emissions factors. So completely understand what you say. At the moment you plug in, you don't actually know what you're getting through the grid. It could be combined gas turbine power. It's a mixture of things that come through. But what they've looked at is the pathway to net zero in electrical production in producing the figures they've produced for us over that time. So hopefully that clarifies that. It doesn't get over the problem you say that you can't guarantee what you get through your power source. If I pass to your question about gravity and gravity travel plan to Mickey, because Mickey's more dealing with that. And your first question, Councillor Dunk, was regarding...
It's just the fuels. Are we going to be happy with sort of other like buses, for instance, using biofuels which are basically from crops?
Yeah, so I think this is one where Councillor Mansell has voiced a similar view on this. At the moment, the way the law stands, they're not illegal. We've looked at it purely on carbon emissions, and we've not been convinced that HVOs actually are a reduction in carbon emissions. So on that basis, we haven't accepted them as a carbon reduction measure, but we haven't stopped outright our suppliers using them. I don't think, unless somebody tells you, I don't think we use HVO in our own fuel. So the ethical considerations are something that matters clearly for you as members to raise with us. And the other problem that we have is there are some accreditation schemes as well that purport that certain HVOs are more sustainable than others. The problem we have is that none of them are particularly, the veracity of them is difficult to establish. So I think there's more work to be done on that, Councillor Dunk, on HVO fuel.
Thank you.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Slocum, been waiting patiently online.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Can you hear me all right? Can you hear me? Yeah, thank you. A lot of it's been said. I just would like to thank Alison and Mike, because I think this is a really hard, it's a hard subject, a hard emotive subject, and I think it's a good report. The thing that I keep bleating on about is that can we in principle achieve a better public transport modelling scheme in? We're not going to educate the public to stop using their cars as much if they can't get to A to B. I have many people, and I expect you all do, who get in their car just to drive 100 yards down the road. It's just criminal. But you know what? I think if we had a better transport model in the medium term, to make people understand that they can get into town, they can get here, they can get there, I think it has to happen. We can't keep talking about, and the report is really good, you know, we can't keep saying about the 96%, but you know what, we have to educate people not to take their car out on the road, that actually they can jump on a bus, but they need that bus to be localised and readily available and regular. And I believe that this is essential to achieving what we want to achieve. It's not all of it, of course it's not. And Councillor Mansell said it far better than me. But you know, some of the points he raised were really, really good. And I won't. You obviously know about gravity. Gravity, that modelling in gravity was done with that very thing in mind. That there will be houses built on site. There will be the travelling issues very, very much uppermost in the whole gravity package. So that will come to the council very shortly, I'm sure, and we're keeping our fingers crossed for that. But if we could just add that principle, I really would be really happy. And I apologise, I have to leave in a minute for another meeting, but I've enjoyed this morning. But if you could just give me some light at the end of the tunnel, I would be very pleased. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Slocum. And I think yeah, if we are to attract more people onto public transport, we need to get a much better, different system. I think, you know, we've already started to do that with the bus service improvement plan funding that we've had, which we've unfortunately had to focus in one area because of the limitation of the funding, but it is starting to make a difference, I think, to how public transport operates. So I think what we want to do is to demonstrate that works, then go back to government to try and replicate that elsewhere with more money. There has to be a longer term conversation, I think, around what rural transport looks like. I think over the next 20 years or so, there will be hopefully something that looks quite different and is actually more accessible to working age people in rural areas, but I don't think we're quite there yet. So I think there's a sort of there's a transformational thing to do over the very long term, but in the meantime we can do some really good stuff with more money, and that's what we're demonstrating to government.
Thank you. Mickey, you wanted to come back on the gravity point?
Yeah, it's just obviously limited in what we can say in terms of pre-election period, and there hasn't been a formal announcement in terms of Somerset. But the points Jill was making in terms of echoing, you know, Mike's points that if there's an announcement for the gravity site, everything Mike was asking for would be absolutely what we are aiming for. I would anticipate on our current expectation of the timeline that I'd want to bring a paper on gravity to scrutiny in September, which reinforces that point Jamie was making earlier about not wanting to rule out the opportunity for other things being on the agenda, because there's a lot of important business we've got coming up.
Thank you. In the room, Councillor Mike Stanton, one more point.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to pick up on the discussion about crops for fuel and biofuels and so on from the point of view of land use. And I'm looking at this really from the point of view of the Somerset Rivers Authority and flooding. I noticed Councillor Wyke is online. We've already discussed in principle the fact that we really do need a land use strategy for Somerset so that we define properly what land is to be used for growing food and of what types, what land is to be used for water storage, what land is to be used for growing fuel, if that's an appropriate thing to do, what land should lie fallow, what land should be going back to wildlife and so on. We really do need a land use strategy. I'm just wondering shouldn't that be an item, a standing item for this committee? Because, you know, we have a lot of land and we have problems with lots of it. It can be productive and we really should have a proper strategy for it. And incidentally, on the last discussion, it'd be nice if the government backed up its support for the battery factory by getting us a new set of planning rules that are actually workable.
Thank you. I think Councillor Kay had a question online, and I'd like to sum up that point. Unless Dave, you have to ask a question. Councillor Kay's question, please.
Thank you, Chair. So Councillor Kay has left a question saying, it's great that you are tying together transport and planning. There are other strategies of different ages that need review, and wanted to know how/if we are going to tackle them in parallel and make sure they are cross-referenced, specifically parking review, school transport plans, maintaining existing street trees by regular pruning so they don't become a problem and need removal. There was also another question from Councillor Wone, who's also had to leave the meeting. Like to comment on the transport issues. Being clean is non-negotiable and phasing out the ice is key. Let's get to NZ as quickly and efficiently as we can, but avoid being too distracted on the merits of which mode EV/hydrogen is best.
Thank you. I was talking about the wrong Dave, so stand down. Thanks.
Yeah, I think the question within those is about other strategies particularly. So yeah, we certainly intend to wrap up things that are directly relevant to the local transport plan. So parking would be one. I'm sure there is emerging work on school transport, which probably would be sensible to consider at the same time. I wouldn't want to promise too much in terms of detailed operational plans changing, because I think this is still quite a strategic conversation, certainly for the next year or so. So things like detailed tree operational ways of working and policies, etc. I wouldn't want to promise going down to that level of detail at this stage, but there may be things that we can pick up as we go along, and we will if we can.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I've got one question myself, and then we'll sum up. I think the question is, well, how does this work going forward relate to the local cycling, walking infrastructure plans, which I know some parishes and town councils are drafting up and approving, which makes recommendations for 20-mile-an-hour zones or new cycle paths and new signage and new crossing points, but they will rely on funding, which adoption within the LTP process will help get. And without the LTP as a hook, they won't be able to get funding from government for those. Is there a relationship you can briefly explain?
Yeah, so the work on local cycling and walking infrastructure plans is directly tied into the local transport plan. So we've been working on those for a while. They will effectively be sub plans to the local transport plan. We don't propose to go back over those. I mean, they will be live documents and they'll evolve, but we're not going to do a wholesale review for the local transport plan. So those are needed to seek funding from Active Travel England, and will be an integral part of the local transport plan funding model going forward. So I think we just assume, in simple terms, they're there already. We'll continue to evolve them. They will be sub-plans to the local transport plan, but they are very important in funding.
Okay, thank you very much. To sum up, there's a lot of issues raised by a lot of members. Thank you very much for your comments. And the main output from this is that we're going to have a task and finish group involving members in the evolution and adoption of the local transport plan and related work, and an invite and the scope of work will be sent out in due course. Thank you very much. Thank you. Agenda item 6 now, climate, sustainability and environment, next steps. And I invite Kirsty to present briefly to members. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try and keep it fairly brief for you. So this paper is just setting out the work that we've started within the new directorate since the 5 councils have come together to review the action plans that we had across the county, how the areas now work together and with the wider organisation, partners, residents and businesses. Obviously, it's key that the council understands its role in climate mitigation and nature recovery, and it's key that we have a clear plan set out for members and the public to be able to follow and to hold us accountable. Over the next 6 months, there are some areas of work that will enable us to move forward as a directorate, ensuring that we do have those clear actions. They are mentioned on page 46. There's 8 tasks on there that will need to be completed. Part of the paper is also asking agreement from the committee to set up a number of task and finish groups. And with the chair's agreement, I'd like those to be opened up to the wider members as well, not just members of the scrutiny committee, because I think there's a lot of expertise and knowledge that could be shared and utilised to support the development of the climate, the refresh of the climate strategy, the key performance indicators and of the action plans. Thank you, Chair.
Very short and sweet. Thank you very much. Now, questions from the floor, please, if any. Or are we all happy with this? Henry Hophouse, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hobhouse. I know this is something colleagues in the infrastructure are looking at, and I know we are trying to move over to LED lighting as we move forward and replace older lighting, but I will need to get a fuller answer from them. It's not my area of expertise.
Thank you. Matt Martin.
Thank you, Chair. I wonder if somebody could advise. Am I right in thinking that turning off streetlights changes the relationship between highways and the speed limits on that particular road? As in, roads with streetlights have a different speed limit to roads without streetlights.
Yeah, can we take that one away? I don't think the relevant officer's here. Thank you. Bente, you had a question. Thanks.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I just want to say that if you think about turning the light off in Shepton Mallet, you will hear from me plus the half of town. It is for a lot of people very nerve-wracking to go through alleyways with not knowing what they're falling over or what they are meeting on their ways. So street lights, I'm afraid, in car parks and behind a old town centre needs to be in place.
Thank you.
If I may, Chair, I just wanted to clarify that we're not proposing that streetlights are turned off. This is obviously in response to the question by Councillor Hobhouse, but we will be looking at alternatives like LED that are much more energy efficient and use less kind of electricity to run. Thank you.
Thank you. Dixie Darch. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I think this paper is mostly about asking the scrutiny group if they're happy about setting up a task and finish group. I just want to say that I believe that cross-party support on acting on climate change is imperative. This is one issue where politics shouldn't get in the way. We need to bring everyone with us, and I see a cross-party task and finish group probably with people, as Kirsty said, kind of wider than this group, would be a really positive move.
Thank you. I think I can agree to that. I don't think there's anyone objecting to a task and finish group on the climate strategy, because it's a very important thing. Do we have a timescale for that being set up at all? What's the ideal? And would we have an invite and a scope sent out?
If I may, Chair, I think we'll probably be looking towards the autumn to start getting those in. We'll try and get dates in the diary fairly early. I know that members get very busy, and we want obviously as much participation as possible, and also to obviously circulate papers beforehand, so that enables informed discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions online. I think we're happy with the paper. That was nice and quick. I think for time purposes, agenda item 7, we're proposing to defer this, Somerset's approach to green growth, to save a bit of time, but everyone's seen and read the report. It was really an informative. So if we can move on to agenda item 8, Staple Grove Housing Infrastructure Fund. Can I ask Jenny Clifford to present? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Jenny Clifford, Taunton Garden Town Implementation Manager. Members, this report is brought before you. You will have gathered it's heading towards the meeting of our executive on the 2nd of August. And members, we wish to give you the opportunity to consider the report and its recommendations in advance of heading to that executive meeting. I think members, particularly important in this instance because of the urgency and the speed with which, as a council, we need to move in order to ensure that various timescales and milestones are met. Members, I do have a few quick slides just to help you in terms of context. So first of all, members, this Staple Grove site, it's an allocated site in the development plan for the area. I'm not sure if you are all familiar with it, but it's located to the northwest of Taunton. And as you can see on the screen there, it's allocated for 1,500 homes, but also includes other development aspects as well, as you can see, including employment, primary school, and a new spine road through the middle of the site. The intention of which is to not only take the additional traffic from the development, but also to safeguard the existing Staple Grove village from the additional development traffic from going through that village as well. So there is an element of traffic calming consideration too. Moving to the next slide, if I can. And I've just lost my connection, I think.
It's up on there.
Thank you. In terms of the status of the site, because this directly relates to progress in delivery and the role of the Housing Infrastructure Fund, the site is actually being brought forward in two distinctly separate parcels. On Staple Grove West, as you can see the number of houses there, we have a developer on board with a land deal having been completed, but critically, members, we also have outline planning permission having been granted, and this part of the site also has a phosphate solution with an off-site wetland scheme also having received planning permission. And colleagues in planning are engaging at the moment with the developer over their more detailed proposals to bring the site forward. In terms of Staple Grove East, there is no developer on board as yet. It is in the hands of a land promoter, and behind that, the individual landowners. Critically, on the eastern side of the site, it contains a primary school site, which colleagues in education are very keen to secure as quickly as possible to meet the need for places in the area. And whilst Staple Grove East has a planning resolution to grant outline, phosphates then came along and the planning outline was not resolved. The Section 106 was not signed in advance of needing to find a phosphate solution. So that application remains live and needs to come back to Planning Committee at a future date. So Staple Grove East is now more delayed in relation to West. Members, in terms of the Housing Infrastructure Fund, as you will see from the report before you, the intention is very much to fund infrastructure in order to unlock housing delivery. It is effectively operating as a loan to developers or the landowners. And the intent is that we passport the HIF funds to them. They actually deliver the infrastructure, and as I've set out within the report, particularly on the western side of the site in terms of the commencement of construction. And importantly, members, the HIF funds need to be recovered, so hence a loan. It's recovered locally with interest, and then we as a council are able to then recycle that recovered funding towards further infrastructure and unlock additional housing. So the benefit of the HIF funding, the not insurmountable £14 million, can be realised on more than one occasion through that loan and recovery process. We have been engaging with Homes England extensively, and you will see from your paperwork in terms of timescale that although the funding availability period was initially due to expire at the end of March 2023. It has now been extended until the end of March 24. We have renegotiated a refresh, refocus of the infrastructure package with Homes England, understandably focusing on infrastructure which is able to be delivered, or items that can be secured within that critical period between now and the end of March 24. The recommendations that have been set out within the report to the executive seek to gain authority to enter into the necessary agreements, but also for this council in terms of the eastern side of the site to seek to acquire land rights so that as and when required, we can then take control of aspects such as the primary school site, the land for highway infrastructure. In contrast, members, in Staple Grove West, where we have outline planning permission, the HIF funding is proposed to be utilised to underground overhead power cables and also to start the highway works in terms of the first junction of that proposed spine road with the A358 Staple Grove Road. So that's broadly, members, the split in terms of the usage of the proposed HIF funds. So I think, members, the last slide I was just wanting to put up is the recommendation to the executive, as I've already mentioned, the various authorities that are needed, and also the delegated authority in order to enact any decision of the executive. I've mentioned timing. We have intervening milestones set for us by Homes England between now and the end of March that we need to meet in order to keep the project on track. And therefore, members, I'm anticipating that in the event of agreement by members of the executive, we will need to move quickly in order to implement those resolutions and get the agreement signed and entered into to make sure we meet those agreed milestones with Homes England. And we will need to start drawing down money to start supporting the project management side of things within the next few months as well, with anticipation of the main drawdowns probably towards sort of December and towards the beginning of next year. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jenny. Does anybody have any comments or concerns? I'm looking particularly also at Councillor Darch there. It's one of the two Water Division members. Do you have any comments or concerns on this?
Yes, thank you, Chair. And I know I was sent this document some time ago, but it's really nice to have the opportunity to hear you, Jenny, and kind of listen to those details. I'd like to thank the officers for their work on this, because obviously losing that HIF fund because of the phosphate issues would have been a bit of a tragedy, really. So it's not an ideal solution. I would have liked the original plan where it went to fund the spine road, but it's a sort of next best thing, really, in as much as we secure the land for the primary school, and it allows the developers to kind of get started, and there is still that demand that the spine road goes through. My kind of key question is just a bit of concern. I see that the HIF fund needs to be utilised on both east and west, but given the status of the east at the moment, with the uncertainty of not having a designated developer, are we going to run the risk of a spine road which kind of goes halfway or 10 metres into the east and then is left hanging and doesn't join up? That will be the big concern for the residents and for local councillors. Thank you.
Yes, do you want to answer that? Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Darch, I think that is a very relevant question, and I can certainly understand why you've asked it. One detail is you'll probably be aware that both outline planning applications actually contain the whole length of the spine road. So the outline application that has consent and is proposed to be implemented by the developer on the western side So we do have outline permission granted for the whole of the Spine Road. And there are also conditions and Section 106 requirements within that granted permission about the timescale within which the whole of the Spine Road has to be completed in relation to the number of houses that are actually constructed on the western side of the site. And I think it's likely that that would be mirrored in terms of future negotiations on the eastern side of the site as well. So that split between the two halves of the site isn't quite so so much of a clear split when it comes to the Spine Road. Negotiations so far have sought to ensure that as a council we've got some mechanisms in there to help us be, I think, more confident over the delivery of the Spine Road as a whole, rather than, as you say, the risk of just ending up with half a road.
Thank you. I think Councillor Ashton, did you raise your hand? Oh, no, sorry. Councillor Bradford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to ask a question. Why do things take so long? It's no wonder you can't get developers. People will not commit with high inflation going on and everything else. We've had these problems in Sedgemoor, I keep harping on about, and things did move along a lot faster. But sometimes it's all got so technical. Like things are put in the way just to be awkward sometimes and make things long drawn out. And you can understand everybody's on but developers making profits and all the rest of it. We've got to have profits to keep going. But I keep telling people the profits ain't made by developers that were, because with high inflation and some of the things they've come to the contract they've gone into, they're gonna lose a lot of money on it. And this one in Staple Grove, I thought it was going at great pace, but all of a sudden it's bogged down again. And I share Councillor Darcy's frustration in some of the things that have happened. And for a fellow in business, it's frustrating to see the things going on. I'm a farmer, I make my own decisions at breakfast, and by 10 o'clock I get them working. And when you see things go on for a year, perhaps 2 years, well, it's just unbelievable. And it makes us frustrated to listen. You know, and I can share the developers' concerns. But you aren't careful, there ain't going to be so many developers out there as there has been. Take my word for it. Thank you.
Thanks. Is there any answer you can give to the delays?
Thank you, Councillor Radford. I think one of the main issues that has meant that Staple Grove has not progressed within the timescale initially envisaged, it's got to be the phosphates situation, and it's the need for the development to actually find a phosphate solution. That has now happened on the western side with planning permission having been granted for that off-site wetland scheme. And similarly, on the eastern side, we are aware that the promoter is also putting together a mitigation scheme, and we are expecting a planning application to be submitted for that. So that's a necessary step that they have to go through, as you're aware, before any other sort of, delivery, build out on the residential side of things can take place. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got Edric, Councillor Hobbs.
I'll probably get told this is more for the planning stage, but when it comes down to building the school, which I see is on the second part, I'd like to make sure that all the infrastructure is in place first so kids can get there under their own steam without relying on parents with their cars. I know we raised this when we had at the school we approved at Scrutiny before. I think it's really important to make sure that it's not done afterwards, that all the cycling footpaths go in so the children can get there and get into the habit of getting there without mum and dad taking there the SUV. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Darch. Thank you.
Can I just come back on that? The case officer, Simon Fox, has been working really hard with the developers to improve the active travel on that development, and particularly with an eye to children who will be going to Taunton Academy, which I think is going to change its name soon to Perland School or something like that. So there's been a lot of progress. In a way, the delay has definitely been regrettable, but it has allowed lots of negotiation between the council and the developers to improve the layout, particularly around active travel. So,
thank you. I think Councillor Cavill. Thanks.
Just a bit of concern, Jenny. I thought the HIF funding was granted first of all because of viability issues with the whole site. And it enabled social housing to be put back into the equation that would have to have come out otherwise from the development plan. Therefore, should it have been evenly spread across the site? I know there would have been a chunk for the school, and as you make ensuring that the 713 is getting going in the first instance, we'll be able to reuse some of the money if necessary to help the next site. So it's deliverability of the whole site question, really, and whether this helps to muddle it a bit.
Thank you, Councillor Cavill. I think there's quite a lot there in that question. So in terms of viability, with outline planning permission having been granted on West, we already have an infrastructure package negotiated through the Section 106 agreement. I think the big question is, obviously we have a live application on Staple Grove East at the moment. In terms of the HIF, the housing infrastructure funding, it is the rules of the game, if you like, changed somewhat during the process of the negotiation before now over the housing infrastructure fund, with the emphasis less on I think less on making a big difference viability wise, but more front loading. We are asked now, in terms of our recovery of the HIF funds, to recover with a commercial rate of interest, so that there is no commercial benefit for the developer in entering into the HIF funding. So things like subsidy control and state aid issues are then covered off. In terms of the delivery of the site as a whole, that is very much in our minds as officers to achieve. In terms of the split of the funding between East and West, I think, Councillor Cavill, we very much had to take a pragmatic view about what can be achieved in terms of spend within the funding availability period. Hence, the lack currently of outline planning permission on East has meant that the options available to us to spend the funding are therefore more limited, because it has to be drawn down and spent before March 24. And the full development, the full infrastructure, etc., on the eastern side does not have planning permission currently. Our aim has been very much to try and retain as much of this funding as we can, recover and recycle it. We are able to recycle it, but we will need to demonstrate to Homes England that by doing so, it will unlock more housing than its initial purpose. So I think it's likely that it would be for other sites, other schemes within the local area, thereby demonstrating that additionality of housing. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Dave Mansell.
Thanks. Yeah, I just feel I should ask in relation to the eastern part of the site. Are you able to comment on, so there isn't a developer yet, but it's also clearly not fully gone through planning either, so it's still got a way to go. Is there anything you can say on prospects for a developer for the eastern part? And I guess particularly what I've sort of got in mind is whether there are any risks of the not being a developer, and then does that, with the decision proposed here, lead to knock-on risks to the council from the okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I think all I can say is we are aware of discussions and considerable developer interest. I don't think I can say any more than that in respect of that. But also, I think, to underline, we are talking about an allocated site in the development plan. So I think we are confident that it will come forward and be delivered. I think it's just a question of timescale. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think I've got one question really. Can you reassure us that both division members and the parish councils are being fully and appropriately engaged during this process, as well as the planning system as well?
Thank you, Chair. my understanding is that particularly the case officer, the planning case officer, has been undertaking considerable engagement with the division members, and at what was a parish council and now to be clearly town council level. In terms of the HIF process itself, Chair, we've had to move at speed. So I think it's fair to say there has probably not been so much engagement specifically over the HIF funding. I think simply because of the need to undertake those urgent discussions with Homes England and get everything in a row to meet the various timescales. But I'm sure that we'll be more than happy to have a meeting with the divisional members and with members from the town council about it. We can extend an offer. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that might be useful going forward. We've got recommendations for the executive. If we're happy, we can simply note those, I believe, and hopefully the comments we've just discussed can be annotated and put into the report to the executive. Okay, any objections? Thank you. That's noted. Thank you very much. Can we move on to the agenda item 9, Mendip local plan? So we have Alison Blom-Cooper and Andre Sestini to present the paper, which has already, of course, gone to executive. I think it was last week or week before. But this is to help discuss at scrutiny in an informal way, but still at the formal meeting. Thanks.
Chair, there are a few slides briefly to take you through what was put forward as an urgent item for very specific reasons to do with a High Court case last week, and also concerns essentially the former Mendip area, the local plan part 2. So that was the district plan that was adopted in December last year. It was then subject to a judicial review, which looked specifically at a number of sites that the inspector had asked us to look during examination in one part of the district. And that the challenge was made, and ultimately the judge found that actually the inspector had effectively misled the council. It's quite an unusual thing to happen, but he found there was clearly a need to, those sites had been identified improperly, and the decision to adopt the plan was unlawful. What he then did was actually, rather than cancel the whole plan, which would have been an option, say that, well, the sites that were specifically part of the exercise to look in the northeast of the district should be remitted back to the council to reconsider, but the rest of the plan could remain adopted. So that was not long before the unitary process, and obviously those former Mendip members will be quite familiar with this because we've had a number of meetings on it just before unitary, effectively. Since then, because of another challenge to changing the policies map afterwards, we found ourselves going back to the judge. He's actually rather clarified what that exercise of reconsideration should be. And in particular, when we got to executive, he was waiting for executive to actually commit to do this review process quite urgently and set a timetable for it, which is really the background to why it came to committee in the first place. I think what is also clarified for us is this piece of work is discrete and separate to the Somerset-wide plan. It's about looking at sites in the context of quite early delivery by 2029. And I think what we potentially entertained at the time of unitary is maybe we would wrap this up into the larger process, but that's clearly not possible and actually is in potentially breach of the court order. So we have to be quite careful about that. So the next slide, thanks. So, in fact, since executive, we've actually had the judgment from the court, which I'm pleased to say, in terms of the policies map, we did win, and the judge wasn't impressed with that. But he has set a timetable broadly as went to executive, but he has made it shorter. So we're looking to try and submit any proposals by the end of July next year. However, we do have the option of going back to, I think we have to pursue the timetables we've got. And then if it looks like for any particular reason we can't meet that timetable, we'd have to go back and get the dates amended in the order. So we're still able to do that, but clearly not at this stage. We'll have to progress as far as we can. So just to highlight what's unusual about the process is because the rest of the plan is adopted, this has to be a plan-led approach. In other words, this is a narrow exercise, but essentially similar to making a plan. There will be a consultation process for 6 weeks, probably by the next spring, and then a formal set of proposals issued, which actually are submitted before a planning inspector. And these will then, the sites, either the existing sites or new sites, will need to be adopted and become part of the plan. So it's a longer process than just the council, for example, deciding for itself which sites are suitable. So I've set out those dates. If you go on to the next slide, I think what I'm key to highlight here is that, as with the local plan process, decisions about sites will go through both informal and formal consultation in various stages. The next slide. So there'll be consultation on options. We have to do that by Christmas, at least start that by Christmas. Formal representation period will be March and April next year. And then there will be an examination process as well. So those making, if we come up with a better site than the ones we had originally in the plan, there would still be a period for submitting representations to the inspector, to an appointed inspector. Then just to highlight in terms of how this will be managed, I mean, the decisions about publishing plans will go to executive. There's still some discussion about maybe a subcommittee of executive to deal with plans. I think for this particular exercise, because it's really focused largely on the Somerset East members, that once we've got responses back from our sort of call for site stage and we've looked at the options, we actually hold some sort of specific workshops on what options we're putting forward for consultation and also the final choices. And we'll also give briefings, again, not necessarily to exclude any members from other parts of Somerset, but I think, and I'm sure you want to be involved, but essentially it's their area. We'll run briefings largely targeted at Somerset East members. I think that's with all the slides. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions? It's been through executive already, but obviously the time scale has been updated from the report, and three dates have changed, haven't they, out of the 4 dates? But the first one still, start for the call for sites 24th of July. That's definitely achievable?
That's definitely achievable. I mean, the call, we haven't normally, for the local plan process, most will be familiar that you undertake a call for sites to understand what land's available. The last time we did that properly was probably 2014-15 in Mendip, so it's a bit not quite out of date, but there are potentially sites which we don't know about, which ought to be included in this process, and clearly we do need to have an up-to-date list of those. But that's not a consultation, that's to inform the choices later on.
Yes.
But yes, that'll run over the summer, and again, because it's largely developers and agents,
yes,
really
they have to go
prejudice the
first.
public in terms of looking on this site.
So when do parish council, town council, city councils have a go to see this? I suppose it's the first consultation, isn't it?
It will be the first consultation. I think we will notify, because it's a change to the plan, we statutorily have to notify all the stakeholders that we're undertaking this process and the timeline. So we'll give some guidance then. I think I've got a particular concern that with the short timeline that we have, we'll need to make sure that the parishes and town councils are aware of that so that they can potentially respond earlier in the process. Can't perhaps be as generous about timescales in terms of representations.
I've got 1 or 2 either progressing a neighbourhood plan now or wanting to. I'm assuming that those who haven't really started it properly will kind of be superseded by this process.
No, neighbourhood plans remain independent.
Yes, but I mean the importance of the designation of or otherwise of those sites.
Yeah.
This may overtake the process, I suppose.
in Mayday, we were continuing to support the ones that are happening in Somerset East at the moment.
Yes. And do we have it? Is it Christmas Eve? We're going to be consulting because that's New Year's Eve is the deadline, isn't it? That's a lovely Christmas present for people, isn't it?
I think the judge said by that we will be aiming. I mean, we would normally not consult over Christmas period, but the judges thought otherwise. So, but we'll clearly be launching that consultation where it may either ahead of Christmas or after, and certainly allowing additional time because of that. But
so ideally, you wouldn't want to consult during the Christmas New Year period because people have other things to do, right? But might be required. Okay. So any other questions or comments or online or in the meeting? Otherwise, I'll say thank you very much. No? You seem happy. Well, we'll see what happens. Thank you very much. Thanks, Andre. Let's move to agenda item 10, the final one, scrutiny call-ins. So Jamie Jackson here will present a verbal update to members about scrutiny call-ins.
Thank you, Chair. As per the Council's constitution, if a call-in is made to a scrutiny chair, then it is the chair's responsibility to update the committee at the next meeting about the call-in request. Obviously, the chair isn't here today, so I said that I would step in for Martin. About 3 weeks ago, a key decision was taken regarding fees and charges in within Somerset car parking. A request from a councillor came in for a call-in. He secured the appropriate support from a fellow committee member, and the call-in request was put forward to the chair. A very detailed call-in request actually was put forward to the chair. In the process then is subsequent discussions with the chair along with key officers. So Steve Deacon, who is the sort of the service manager for parking, along with Mickey and other members of his team. We provided a response. Provided a response to many of the questions and concerns raised. And the chair ultimately decided that he was reassured sufficiently that there was no need to proceed with the call-in. So I was asked to notify the councillor who'd submitted the call-in request of that decision. And that effectively was the end of the matter. I haven't had any further communication from the councillor challenging that decision. So within the constitution, it says that you need to be updated of that. Hence, this is the update. Obviously, if the chair had agreed to the call-in, it would have then come to this meeting as another item for today's agenda. But that wasn't the case. And that's the end of the update, really. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you. Do we have any questions in the room or online about the update or the process? I've got one question. Obviously, Chair is consulted on these questions. Vice Chair and me haven't been. Is that something that can be looked at?
It can be. I mean, it is very.
There's a lot of pressure for the one member,
absolutely,
chair to just take that decision without discussing it.
Absolutely. I mean, it is quite clear within the constitution that it's obviously the chair's responsibility. However, if the chair obviously away, it will then become the vice chair's responsibility. So yeah, I will ensure that sort of party of those.
I'm being copied in.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Thanks. Thank you. No comments. That's good. Well, it just comes to me to thank everybody for attending in person and online, and to remind everybody that the next meeting of this committee will be on the 20th of September at 10 o'clock, and it will not be in this room. It will be at Brimpton Way in Yeovil, because the committee's on tour. I wonder where next. Any other questions or comments from anyone about anything? Well, thank you very much. Let's close the meeting. And I think that's 5 minutes ahead of schedule. Wow.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.